Every day, around the world, approximately 2.4 billion cups of coffee are consumed to meet this great demand. Millions of people harvest tons of coffee beans. But how are 175,000 jars of coffee produced every day? We visited the NESCAFÉ factory to find out how one of the world's most popular beverages is made. Coffee is the second most consumed beverage in the world after water. It is believed to have been discovered by a shepherd who noticed that his goats became more active after eating certain beans. Coffee has been cultivated for over 1,000 years and is now produced in more than 60 countries worldwide. The history of Nescafé dates back to the early 20th century, when Swiss chemist Max Morgan began working on a way to produce soluble coffee. In 1930, Nestlé acquired the patent rights from Morgan and began producing and marketing soluble coffee under the Nescafé brand. The company invested heavily in advertising and promotion, and soon Nescafé became a leading brand in the coffee market. During World War II, Nescafé became a staple for American troops and Allied forces, as it was easy to transport and prepare on the battlefield. After the war, Nescafé became a popular product worldwide, and Nestlé continued to innovate in the production and packaging of soluble coffee. The flavor of coffee depends on the region in which it is grown and the system that producers use to roast and blend the beans. Brazil is the world's largest coffee producer, with approximately 35% of coffee coming from here. It starts with these flowers, and 9 months later, the cherries are the size of grapes. Coffee harvesting occurs once the fruit is ripe and can be identified by its intense red color. From coffee flowering to harvesting, it usually takes between 6 and 9 months. In 6 months, the cherries grow and ripen into the red husks containing the coffee bean. Workers pick the red husks and leave the green ones to ripen. They will return to pick the husks from the same plant as they ripen. Workers strive to ensure there are no more than 2 green berries per 100 leaves they collect. They empty the baskets into sacks and load them onto trucks. Each sack contains about 4 pounds of coffee beans, enough to make about 200 cups. Harvesting by hand is exhausting work, so some coffee plantations have turned to one of these. This 16-foot-tall harvester does the work of 100 people. As it moves along a row of trees, the machine vibrates rods inside it that knock the husks off the branches. The fresher the husk, the better its flavor. The cherries collected in the morning are stored in a wet mill ready for processing in the afternoon. In the wet mill, water channels wash the cherries and drop them onto an endless screw. This loads them into a pulper to separate the outer skin and fruit. A rotating drum presses the cherries against the wall of the pulper and squeezes them so that the bean comes out. From the pulper, the beans travel by water to 2 huge rotating cylinders. There they are sifted to separate them from the green, hard cherries that have passed through the pulper. Next, the beans are bathed in more water that extracts a thick, sugary substance. Then, workers spread them out to dry in the traditional way on a cement patio. For 4 days, they rake the beans to dry them in the sun. Once dry, the beans go to a polisher where huge stones separate the husk from the bean. The dry beans no longer have husks and go to an oscillating table that separates them by weight into 3 categories. The beans from each category are poured into sacks whose exact contents must be 150 pounds before being sent to coffee processing plants. The sacks are sewn and stacked for shipping. But how are these coffee beans turned into a quality cup of coffee? Every year, 35 million tons of freshly harvested fruits arrive at plants like this one of the largest soluble coffee plants in the world. This is the Nestlé factory, where 890 people work making soluble coffee. Every day, 175,000 jars of coffee are produced. It all starts with the delivery of coffee beans. 170 tons of beans arrive from South America at this instant coffee factory. Up to 560 tons are stored in this enormous silo, and every day, 1,200 sacks of raw material enter the plant. To begin, sampling is done by poking each bag and obtaining a coffee sample. At the Nescafé factory, two types of coffee are used, the Arabica variety and the Robusta. The Arabica species produces a fine aromatic coffee, whereas the Robusta is characterized by a high body and strong flavor. Once the batch is approved, it enters the production line. The coffee passes through a mesh that retains any larger residues the bag might have. Through a system of pipes, the beans reach the cleaning section, where they pass through a machine with different sieves that remove impurities and make the final selection. Once clean, it is sent to a silo identified by its variety and type, already specifically destined for the process of making soluble coffee. Next, it goes to the roasting phase. The beans are introduced into a roaster. The importance of roasting coffee is to develop the aroma, color, and flavor. Coffee beans are roasted at 410 degrees Fahrenheit. By heating the beans to 410 degrees for 12 minutes, the starches they contain turn into sugars and release the aromatic caffeol that gives coffee its flavor. The roasting also begins to burn the caffeine. The longer the roasting time, the more caffeine is lost. They are constantly stirred to roast evenly without burning. The beans fall into an industrial mill, where they are ground to obtain a coarse powder. The roasted and ground coffee beans are transported to this sector of the plant. Inside these tanks operating as if they were large coffee makers, the coffee is mixed with hot water. This process is known as extraction. When in contact with hot water, the flavors, aromas, and properties of coffee are obtained. The coffee is heated until it condenses into an extract that is spread by a conveyor belt to the next station, the freezing room. Every hour, 8,000 gallons of coffee travel through the heated pipes inside the tower. Heated to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, the water evaporates and is extracted by the siphon. To remove the water, the freeze-drying method can be used. The coffee infusion is frozen at approximately -60 degrees Fahrenheit, causing a thin surface to form that can then be broken into pieces and subjected to vacuum. It is a process characterized by protecting the flavor of the coffee when applied. Workers have to wear thermal clothing to protect themselves from the Arctic temperatures of -60 degrees Fahrenheit. As the liquid coffee advances along the conveyor belt, it receives a blast of cold air. It only takes 2 minutes to solidify, becoming a solid sheet of frozen coffee 0.3 inches thick. Next, it goes to a grinder that crushes it into icy granules between 0.08 and 0.12 inches in size. The granules come out of the freezer in shallow trays, each containing 33 pounds, enough for 75 jars. They are directed to a sluice and introduced into a gigantic vacuum chamber where all the air has been sucked out. Then it goes to the drying chamber. The dryer is heated, which melts the ice in the granules. But in the vacuum, the ice immediately turns into gas without going through a liquid phase. It is a process called sublimation. Once the water is removed, the powdered coffee reaches the filling machine. Hundreds of glass jars are fed into a conveyor belt and filled in less than a second. This machine fills 280 jars per minute. It will take more than 11 hours to fill today's batch of 175,000 jars. Coffee packaging is vacuum sealed to preserve quality conditions for 24 months. Labels are placed on the jars and wrapped in groups of 6. From the factory, Nescafé jars arrive on supermarket shelves. If you enjoyed the video, you can watch similar videos clicking them on screen. Also, subscribe to this channel by enabling notifications to keep learning.